What is going on, guys, and welcome to our 42nd in-depth character review, where today we are looking at the reworked Grand Moff Tarkin. I reviewed him a couple months ago before the rework, and we ranked him as a Padawan. I've been holding off on this review because he is a very interesting character, and at first I was not too impressed. Now I'm only moderately impressed, but we will talk about that soon enough. So let's get right into the history of Grand Moff Tarkin. Once the Republic became known as the Galactic Empire, Tarkin was appointed by Palpatine to be the Empire's very first Grand Moff. The title of Grand Moff was a political one where his job was to govern oversectors, or essentially govern the governors of many different planets. As we saw in Rogue One and the original trilogy, Grand Moff Tarkin was given control of the Death Star in order to place planets in fear so that they would stay loyal to the Empire. Tarkin's overconfidence in the Death Star ultimately led to his death, where he underestimated the rebels' attacks and believed his Death Star was invincible. But as we know, that did not last too long until it blew up right under his own feet. And in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, we continue to see Grand Moff Tarkin deploy fear as a tactic to control his enemies while using potency to his advantage to unleash deadly attacks. So now let's talk about how do we unlock this character and get some more shards to bring him all the way to 7 stars. Now, Grand Moff Tarkin, believe it or not, he used to be a Chromium exclusive character. That is a thing of the past, but you can still find him in the Chromium packs if that is something you'd like to do. But more importantly, you can get him through the free-to-play method in Squad Arena shipments. For 400 Squad Arena currency, you can nab yourself 5 shards of Grand Moff Tarkin. But better yet, when you first unlock ships, you are guaranteed to get 80 shards of Grand Moff Tarkin, essentially guaranteeing you that you will unlock him for absolutely free. And if you are interested right now, there is a limited edition $20 pack called the Imperial High Command Bundle, which is $20 and you get 80 shards of Grand Moff Tarkin. And towards the end, I will tell you if it is worth getting this pack or not. Besides getting his abilities reworked, we also see that he got some tweaking to his kit. And let's first look at the major stats of the character before we consider mods and all the crazy funky stuff going on in his kit. And when we look at the pros, we see Grand Moff Tarkin ditched the Walker and got a lot faster, where he is now number 36 in speed. Before the rework, Grand Moff Tarkin was at 114 speed. They bumped it up by 20, and now he has 134 speed, putting him slightly above that average of 128. But besides that, nothing too major in the pros when we look at the big stats. So let me turn your attention to the averages, where he has a couple of things in here. For potency, he is pretty much right above that average, being number 53 in potency, where before and after the rework, he is at 33%, so nothing changed there. But looking at protection, we did see a nice change here. He is number 64 in protection now. Before the rework, he had 13,727 protection, and afterwards they gave him a little bump to 17,349, so that extra 4,000 in protection does come in handy at times. In terms of his base damage output, they actually lowered it across all of his abilities, as we see in maximum basic damage. He is now number 46, where before the rework he was at 4,610, but now they lowered it ever so slightly to 4,450. And lastly, the other thing that is in the average is the combined health and protection. And right now, since he got that slight bump in protection, he is at 33,169. So it's been a while, guys, but now it's time that we talk about the stuff that Chewbacca wants to cry about. Which means we gotta go straight into the cons, and first of all, we see he is number 87 in health. His health has remained unchanged, where before and after the rework, he has 15,820, and these last two things to point out are all base damage dealing things, where for maximum damage output, he is number 85. Before the rework, he had 4,610 as his maximum damage output, and now it is 4,450. So again, dropped ever so slightly. And AoE actually got a pretty significant decrease for a probably decent reason. We'll argue about that later. But right now for AoE, he is number 42 out of the 43 characters that have an AoE, where before the rework, he can do 2,553. And after the rework, they lowered it by almost 1,000 to 1,528. But you can bump this up, as we'll soon find out, because now we're going to look at the kit of Grand Moff Tarkin, and his basic attack is known as Grand Moff's Attack. Too bad they didn't rename this. It's still a very generic name, but it deals physical damage to one target, and this attack deals 10% more damage for each living ally. But after the rework, they also altered this basic to allow Tarkin to gain 50% potency, which stacks until the next time ultimate firepower is used. Now the big guy that everyone's wondering about, it's called ultimate firepower, which is his special, and before the rework it dealt special damage to all enemies with a 45% chance to remove 70% turn meter. But now they changed it to where he has a 100% chance to remove 50% turn meter, and this attack gains offense equal to double Tarkin's potency percentage. So the turn meter removal got slightly lowered by 20%, but now you at least are guaranteed to at least remove 50% turn meter, assuming that the enemy does not resist. And pretty much how the potency works, if you have 100% potency, it multiplies that by 2, meaning 200 offense, and it gets added to his special damage. And the more potency it has, the stronger this attack becomes. But we will talk about more how this actually works in application, because it's the most interesting thing about him that we all are wondering about. And the next special he has is Intimidation Tactics. Before the rework, it inflicted offense down on all enemies for 3 turns and speed down for 3 turns on all rebels. In addition, Tarkin had a 55% chance to gain 50% turn meter. However, now they changed this to where he gains potency up for 3 turns and inflicts critical chance down and offense down for 3 turns on all enemies. And best of all, rebel enemies cannot resist these debuffs. Then he gains 15% turn meter for each debuffed enemy. Unfortunately, they kind of weakened this ability by taking out the speed down, which would have been very nice to maintain, but on the bright side, it cannot be resisted by rebel enemies. It goes right through foresight, and the potency up increases his potency stat by 50%, which is critical to use right before ultimate firepower. The leader ability, in my opinion, is one of the weakest things about Grand Moff Tarkin. Before the rework, he only granted Empire allies 28 speed. After the rework, they gave him a Zeta, and before you give him the Zeta, Empire allies have 28 speed and inflict defense down for 2 turns on enemies that fall below 100% health, and this cannot be resisted. And with the Zeta upgrade, it bumps up that speed to plus 30 speed for Empire allies, and in addition to that defense down being applied, he can also apply Exposed. And then lastly, Callous Conviction is a brand new ability which is a unique now, and essentially it grants 100% defense equal to his potency percentage. And with the Zeta upgrade, he has the opportunity to gain 20% additional potency for each debuffed enemy on the field. So we'll talk more about how all this works later on, but let's talk about the gear requirements. And one of the nice things about Grand Moff Tarkin is that he is not too difficult to gear it all the way to gear 11. For Rancor gear, he is actually below the average, where he needs a Mark 5 droid collar at gear 8 and a Mark 7 Nubian scanner at gear 10. For AAT raid gear, we see he will need 3 pieces, 2 of them being the Mark 6 thermal detonator and the Mark 6 fusion furnace at gear 10 in order to get to gear 11. And once you get to gear 11, he will also need another Mark 6 thermal detonator. For gold gear, one of the great things about Grand Moff Tarkin is that he needs 0 pieces, so he is 1 out of 13 characters that does not need any gold gear. And for purple gear, he is pretty much right below that average ever so slightly, where the average right now is 1,140 pieces. Grand Moff Tarkin remained unchanged for purple gear, where he needs 1,070 pieces, putting him at number 71. And the great thing about him, he needs a diverse requirement of purple gear. Doesn't need a ton of stun cuffs or hypo syringes, which makes him a fairly easy character to gear up. With all that objective stuff out of the way, let's take a look at my subjective thoughts of Grand Moff Tarkin. And I have to say, the rework has many good things, such as guaranteeing turn meter removal, irresistible debuffs against rebels that can also not be evaded, increased protection, increased defense, and the chance for you to control how much damage Ultimate Firepower can unleash. Ultimate Firepower does indeed have the opportunity to do insane damage, as the screenshot from Reddit of the Rancor raid shows that I found. But in application for Arena, it takes way too long to build up a substantial attack, where most other characters can do big damage from the very start, like Chirrut, Fulcrum Ahsoka, Lando, and many others. to be on par with some of the biggest AoE damage dealers such as Lando, Snowtrooper, and Darth Maul, who can all do about 20,000 damage on their AoE on a consistent and back-to-back basis. Best case scenario, you're looking at 2 to 4 minutes in arena. And I'm showing an example video of how this works. I tossed everyone in Galactic War, and I tried to give Grand Moff Tarkin as much time as needed, and after 4 minutes of stacking up his potency, we were able to get a 20,000 damage dealing attack. It's all fine and dandy for Galactic War or the Rancor raid where time is on your side, but if you wait that long in arena, there's a large chance that he might be defeated, annihilated, ability blocked, stunned, and when you want to use ultimate firepower, you can't because you spent so much time building it up, and all of a sudden, the match is over one way or another. And if the enemy has foresight, all that potency you built up was pretty much all for nothing. So if you are destined and determined to use Grand Moff Tarkin in your team, follow this strategy. I highly recommend you use intimidation tactics at the very start to apply debuffs and therefore gain 75% turn meter, hopefully, and then you can quickly transition into his basic attack and keep using that basic attack until intimidation tactics becomes available once more. And before using ultimate firepower, it is always preferred to make sure you apply intimidation tactics one more time, or just make sure he has potency up beforehand to ensure you're putting out as much damage as possible. And from the example Galactic War video I'm showing, if you notice, as he's constantly increasing his potency, it's actually quite a cool thing. He is increasing his defense and he is cutting down the amount of damage by a huge margin. So that is a good thing. If you are planning on increasing that potency, he should be able to mitigate as much damage as possible, buying him more time to increase his potency and hopefully squeeze out that ultimate firepower at the right moment. In the current meta, his debuffs are sometimes useless since many teams use 4 cleansers and the debuffs he applies will most likely disappear seconds later. The leader ability is by far one of the least developed for the Empire. If you cannot get the enemies below 100% health, you are pretty much using a pre-rework Tarkin. He might become more useful once Fulcrum Ahsoka comes out into the game because he applies a lot of debuffs and Ahsoka's just going to remove them right away, but that means she's also going to lose a lot of health, so that might work to your advantage with Grand Moff Tarkin. So I guess to some, is he a better character than before? Yeah, definitely, he's better than before. Is he one of the best reworks? By far, no. Kylo Ren and Boba Fett are great, and Grand Moff Tarkin is nowhere near their level, and in the current state of the game, there's not too many areas in Arena where you can use him to win on a consecutive basis and a consistent basis. But if you are using Grand Moff Tarkin, let me tell you some of the mortal enemies you need to be aware of. First of all, cleansers, which are very popular now. You have teams with Rex, R2-D2, Zeta, Kenobi, and Chirrut. That's going to cause a lot of problems because he won't be able to apply as many debuffs, and when he does, they will be cleansed very quickly, stun characters that increase his cooldowns and ability block to prevent him from attacking, and using his specials is a pretty big detriment. Anti-Empire characters like Baze and Biggs are very annoying. Assuming the enemy is not a rebel, Tenacity Up will prevent intimidation tactics from working, and his turn meter removal will be prevented, and Foresight completely avoids all the damage you built up for ultimate firepower, and characters that can lower his defense, such as Armor Shred from Sabine, will cut down the amount of defense he is gaining as he's trying to increase his potency. Tarkin's best friends list did get a lot bigger after this rework. You can find some interesting lineups from the work in. All Empire characters are obviously the best friends, but there are some cool examples I want to consider for you. Palpatine's Let the Hate Flow triggers Tarkin's leader ability to go into effect since it removes health from the enemy. So that means you can apply defense down and expose very early in battle, but most likely it will be cleansed a few seconds later. Palpatine is a good leader to increase his health pool, turn meter gain, and potency. Tarkin, when he's leading, can make TIE Fighter Pilot a very, very fast character in the game. Krennic lead works great with Tarkin since his leader ability requires debuffs in order to apply a lot of ability block, and it also grants a nice potency bonus. Gar Saxon lead, although not arena viable, it is an interesting thing to consider because of the fact that when you counterattack, Grand Moff Tarkin will gain a lot of potency because it's more opportunities to increase his potency by 50%. So other characters that also grant retribution, like General Kenobi, are also great. But besides that, cleansers, offense up, buff dispellers, tenacity, potency up, cooldown increases to prevent the enemy from using their own specials, and any character that can apply debuffs are great to consider as best friends. My personal favorite team that seemed to win the most battles out of everything I tried was a Tarkin lead, Death Trooper, Krennic, Nihilus, and Kenobi. For the mod set, we got a couple things to consider here. The two big choices in my mind for the mod set are critical damage and critical chance, or potency. If you plan on only using ultimate firepower in arena once, critical damage and critical chance is probably the way to go to make sure it does as much damage as possible. But if you would like to use a less powerful ultimate firepower but more frequently in battle, potency mods are the way to go, and especially for the Rancor raid, use potency mods to always make sure he is removing turn meter when it is needed. Defense is also a good option if you don't have the other ones available, since it would amplify his defense the longer he is in battle. Primary and secondary mods, increase that speed, baby, to amplify his leader ability. For the plus sign mod, I highly recommend giving him plus 24% potency, and if you can, try to give him stuff that increases his critical damage, protection, and critical chance. One more thing to go, and that is Yoda's do or do not checklist. And for arena, I will say do. You can make him work in lineups, but again, he is not the #1 most arena viable character. Galactic War, totally same thing as arena. You can definitely use him in there, and it does help control the enemies. Dark side battles and cantina battles, definitely do. Mod challenges, he is great for the potency mod challenge, so do for that. Ships is a definite do. He has one of the best fleet commander ships right now, and I will be doing a review of that next week because it did get slightly reworked and not too many people noticed that. For the Rancor raid, 100% do. With the turn meter removal and the chance to unleash a big attack on the Rancor, it works great with a Darth Vader Zeta outside of a Darth Vader Zeta, and it can work great in many turn removal teams. And the AAT raid, I will say do. You can find lineups to make him work, but right now he is not the #1 choice for the AAT raid. And now let's pull up that Hall of Fame and see where Grand Moff Tarkin is going to be ranked in this game. Before the rework, we ranked him as a Padawan, and now, after the rework, from Grandmaster to Youngling, we are going to place Grand Moff Tarkin's rework as a Knight. It's an alright rework, don't get me wrong, but he requires a lot of time to set up ultimate firepower or the right lineup to succeed in arena. His Zeta abilities, especially his leader abilities, are some of the worst Zeta investments in this game, in my opinion, as well as many others in the game. And personally, I would not recommend buying the $20 pack, mainly because his rework is not at par with characters like Kylo Ren and Boba Fett. Plus, he's easy to farm, and when you participate in ships for the first time, you get 80 shards of him for free. So there you have it. A lot about this kit, so hopefully you did learn something about Tarkin today. And if you did enjoy this video, please feel free to leave me a like, comment down below on what you'd like to see next. Check out my Patreon page if you want to hang out with me on a monthly basis, gain access to these in-depth character materials, or even see these videos early. Definitely check that out, and be sure to subscribe so you're not missing a thing. And we will talk again soon. Peace out.